aimed for an outcome that would be transformative and reflective of the urgency of addressing the climate crisis based on latest science, the imperatives of climate justice, and for Africa, recognition of the continent as the special needs and the circumstances region. Throughout the 2 days, we have listened to our leaders and all key stakeholders. We have no doubt, listening to our leaders, that they understand the existential threats posed by the climate emergency, and in totality, hearing from them, we have some convergence on very critical issues. And one of it is enhanced contribution by those who have caused the climate crisis to honor their commitment by deeply cutting their emissions, because that is where the biggest problem is, and ceasing from transferring the burden of action to the victims of their actions in the name of false solutions to climate change. And so also providing, which is very important, adequate, predictable, and easily accessible finance, particularly for adaptation and resilience building in Africa. At this critical moment, Excellencies, we urge you to prioritize the suffering of the people of Africa, regardless of this outcome. We implore to act with one vision and speak one voice at the upcoming COP28 in UAE, and really urge you to really reflect on what is happening to our people. I want to conclude by saying that time is of essence. The scientific evidence is compelling, the window of opportunity is closing, and the stakes are too high. We must act swiftly, together, for a sustainable, ecologically just, equitable future for Africa and the world. And Your Excellency, following the protocol of others, I would urge that I present also a text, though I know we have presented and submitted our document. Thank you, Your Excellency, for accepting to receive me.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite a response now on behalf of parliamentarians, the Honourable Charity Kathambi Chepkwony, Chair of the Parliamentary Caucus on Climate Change.
Your Excellency, the President of the Republic of Kenya, Your Excellencies, guests, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Charity Kathambi Chepkwony, Member of Parliament from Kenya, from part of Rift Valley. Your Excellency, as members of Parliament from Africa, this is our first comment. Climate change is real. We are now here to act. As parliamentarians from Pan-Africa Parliament, Africa Regional Parliament, various national parliaments gathered at the Parliamentary Dialogue at the sidelines of the Africa Climate Summit that was on 31st to 1st September. We sat, Your Excellency, and these are remarks of the legislators from Africa. Number one, we urge the Africa leaders to prioritize climate change adaptation in their engagement in the global and regional processes and dialogue to address the climate crisis, particularly during the COP28. Number two, we call for increased support and the solidarity from international community, especially the developed countries, to provide adequate, predictable, and accessible financing, technology transfer, and the capacity building for Africa adaptation effort, in line with the Paris Agreement goal of mobilizing US dollars 100 billion annually by 2020. Our number 3 call, Your Excellencies, is prioritizing the rapid operationalization of the Santiago Network on loss and damage as means to catalyze technical assistance to developing countries that are vulnerable. And Your Excellency, our number 4, we stress the need to more than triple adaptation finance for Africa, largely in form of grants, as current levels are insufficient to meet the estimated adaptation costs in developing countries in Africa. Number 5, Your Excellency, we request for support to finalize the implementation of the global goal of adaptation under the Paris Agreement, which aims to enhance adaptive capacity, strengthen resilience, and reduce vulnerability to climate change in a measurable, reportable, and viable manner. And our number 6, Your Excellency, as legislators from Africa, we appeal for enhanced cooperation and coordination among Africa countries and the region to share best practices, mobilizing climate funds to scale advance across border programs. And our number 7, as legislators from Africa, Your Excellency, we are committed as legislators to effectively execute our legislative roles, oversight, and the budgetary mandate to ensure that Africa has the right legal and the policy frameworks and the needed resources to aid climate change in response interventions in Africa. And our number 10, as legislators, Your Excellency, we are calling upon Africa Union member states to ensure that members of parliament are part of the national delegation in various national areas. And lastly, Your Excellency, we applaud you as the President of Kenya for having this Africa's Climate Summit, for also having time and coming to launch our Africa meeting, which we had with the legislators in South Africa. And Your Excellency, thank you so much as legislators. We appreciate for getting this platform where we get position to share our ideas, our challenges, and the best practices. And lastly, Your Excellency, it is also good in this forum I say that Kenya is the first country in Africa continent to have a Climate Change Act 2016. And lastly, Your Excellency, we have also managed to do the new Amendment Bill 2023 in inclusion of the carbon credits and the trading. Thank you, Your Excellency. Sir, allow me to submit what members of Parliament have told me to submit to you.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, you're getting your steps in. But Moussa Faki is getting away lightly with no extra homework. So it's been noted, Excellency. Now I'd like to invite a response from the World Meteorological Organization and ask Piteri Talas, the Secretary General of WMO, to make a few remarks.
Your Excellency, the following is the statement from the World Meteorological Organization, which is a special agency of United Nations for authoritative voice of weather, climate, and water. In light of the increasing impact of weather, climate, and water extremes over the African continent due to climate change, the most vulnerability of the continent and the need for the whole Africa to urgently adapt to the impacts of climate change. The World Meteorological Organization supports strongly the development of the Nairobi Declaration, and also strongly committed to supporting the development of capacities for the generation of sound and impact-based information services for climate change adaptation and mitigation. In particular, WMO, together with the relevant UN agencies through the UN Early Warning for All, which is commissioned by the UN Secretary-General Mr. Guterres to cover all the nations with early warning services by 2027, in the next 5 years. In supporting the strengthening of capacities of all the nations to generate and utilize the early warning services. In response, WMO with the African Union Commission and other UN agencies have just launched at this summit in the past 2 days the African Regional Climate Statement and the African Regional Early Warning for All Action Plan to enable information for supporting national, regional, sustainable social-economic development. African solutions need a global support and also global contributions. Your Excellency, to garner the essential political support and provide strategic leadership for the early warning for all, WMO would like to confer the WMO Continental Champion role to His Excellency, the President William Ruto. And this is a great opportunity and also a great honor. And I do believe this will provide the great support for the African climate solution. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Your Excellency, the certificate from World Meteorological Organization. Thank you so much.
Your Excellency Moussa Faki, please also come and receive the certificate for all your hard work as well. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'd like to now invite a ministerial response and ask the head of the delegation, His Excellency Mr. Kumaran Periasamy, the Additional Secretary of Economic Relations and Development Partnership, Ministry of External Affairs of the Government of India, to say a few words.
His Excellency Moussa Faki, Chairperson, African Union Commission, His Excellency Dr. William Ruto, President of Kenya, Excellencies, Heads of State and Heads of Government, Ministers, dignitaries from various international organizations, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to represent the Government of India at this historic Africa Climate Summit. The conversations over the past 2 days are an important reminder for all of us that the pathway to effective and enduring global climate action goes through Africa and with Africa. That developing countries, and particularly Africa, lie at the front line of our response to global warming, climate justice, climate adaptation and mitigation, food security, and biodiversity conservation. On behalf of the Government of India, I would like to congratulate President William Ruto for leading from the front for Africa on this vital issue, and applaud the Africa Climate Summit for underscoring the salience of Africa in addressing the climate conundrum ahead of COP28 in the UAE. I extend our congratulations to Kenya and to the African Union on the adoption of the Nairobi Declaration that crafts an agenda for AU ambition and action. India will work with the African Union on forging effective international climate action that works for developing countries and for the African continent. While developing countries have contributed little to the climate-related challenges that we face today, we remain disproportionately affected by climate-induced disasters. Ladies and gentlemen, as this summit closes, another summit hosted by India is about to begin in New Delhi on 9th September that will bring together the G20 countries. Climate change has been a key priority of India's G20 presidency, and it will find ample reflection at the summit. Ambitious outcomes adopted by the G20 towards climate action include the G20 high-level principles on lifestyles for sustainable development, the G20 high-level principles for a sustainable and resilient blue economy, the G20 high-level voluntary principles on hydrogen, G20 voluntary action plan on doubling the global rate of energy efficiency improvement by 2030. We look forward to unveiling more initiatives at the G20 summit in Delhi. Excellencies, it is India's belief that the Global South has to be a much larger and more vocal participant in finding solutions to intractable global issues. While most of us resoundingly endorse the urgent call for climate action, the ability of developing countries to take effective climate action is interlinked with the availability of means of implementation, such as climate finance, transfer of technology, and capacity building. The world needs to come together to make available accessible, adequate, and affordable climate finance to the developing countries, including Africa, for effective climate action and meeting their NDCs. Developing countries cannot deploy low-carbon climate technologies at scale unless a facilitative global technology transfer regime is in place. Recognizing this, India has undertaken a number of initiatives to fight against climate change. India counts on Africa as an invaluable partner and ally in these efforts and initiatives that can help harvest our intersecting opportunities and address our shared challenges. President Ruto welcomed us to a brave new future in his address here. It is a vision of the future that resonates with us, a future that recognizes the interconnections that bind us, and a future where our potential as countries and as people have an opportunity to find their due expression. I close by saying you have India's steadfast partnership in this endeavor. Asante Nisana, thank you and namaskar.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, today Africa speaks with one voice in telling the world, here we stand and change you must. Africa is the future of the world, and we are all so proud of the promises made and the progress in the Nairobi Declaration and the $23 billion in commitments. Congratulations once again to all our leaders, especially to our President, Mheshimiwa Rais, for your leadership and your commitment. We now formally close the Africa Climate Summit, and we will, as you leave the room, play the especially commissioned summit song. So on behalf of all of Kenya, thank you so much, all of you, for coming here for this extremely important and critical conference at a critical juncture in the world today. Asante sana. I'll hand you over now to Mike Gitonga.
Thank you, Zain. Mine is just to give you the exit protocols as we now proceed to the KICC courtyard for final remarks to all and sundry and to the stakeholders. So we'll kindly allow the excellencies to leave through the VVIP exit. Then the rest of us, I'll kindly request that we use the right as we all now proceed to the KICC courtyard. Let's kindly settle and allow our excellencies to leave first. Then we proceed for the final part of this in the KICC courtyard. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, your excellencies, as we now proceed to the KICC courtyard. I'll also request that we have all those doors open to allow all of us to leave seamlessly from that end.
it without doing what is required to fix the problem. This is unfair, but in the long run, playing the blame game is not the answer. A more pragmatic approach is for Africa to be a key player in the search for global climate solutions. Africa stands united and should remain so in this and in its position. In this regard, allow me to take this opportunity to commend President Dr. William Ruto for his exceptional leadership of the Committee of African Heads of State and Government on Climate Change. In Rwanda, we want the private sector to play a greater role in building a green economy. Our strategy is to position ourselves as an attractive destination for international climate financing and investment. That's why the COP27, at that summit, Rwanda launched Ireme Invest, a green investment facility created by the Rwanda Green Fund in partnership with the Development Bank of Rwanda. So far, more than 200 million has been mobilized, US dollars that is, from domestic and international partners, including the European Investment Bank and the Green Climate Fund. We have also been working closely with the International Monetary Fund as a participant in the Resilient and Sustainability Trust. We have access to long-term financing to further integrate climate into our economic policies. This is a good sign that the international community is taking seriously the call to reform our global financial architecture. But there is still room for improvement. In this context, I welcome the discussions held at the Paris Summit for a new global financial pact. The Bridgetown Initiative, spearheaded by Prime Minister Mia Mottley of Barbados, also deserves consideration and serious attention. Any meaningful structural change must favor debt restructuring and lower interest rates, as President William Ruto has so eloquently explained. As chair in office of the Commonwealth, Rwanda supports the development of a multidimensional vulnerability index led by the United Nations in partnership with the small island developing states. Gross national income, GNI, does not accurately measure a country's vulnerability to climate change. In any case, small islands and developing states should not be penalized for having higher income levels. Ultimately, what Africa wants is fair and equal partnership, which takes our priorities into account. That is going to be the basis for trust and solidarity. I hope this summit will serve as a good foundation for discussions later in this year at COP28. I thank you for your kind attention, and Mr. President, thank you for convening us here.
Round of applause for President Paul Kagame. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Now is the opportunity for President Salva Kiir, the President of South Sudan, to make his statement. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Bana ba Kenya namugeza ndi mulembe gundi aya mumbe kama lumwelezera ko kulaiwa kuba nenda kama tunda ko buru mu Kenya.
Your Excellency Dr. William Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya and Chairman of the Committee of African Governments on Climate Change, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Your Excellency Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General, Your Excellency John Kerry, United States Climate Change Envoy, Your Excellency Dr. Sultan Ahmed Al-Jaber, COP28 President Designate and the UAE Special Envoy for Climate Change, Honorable Ministers for Climate Change, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Let me start my remarks by expressing my deepest gratitude to the government and the people of Kenya for the warm welcome and for successfully hosting this first Africa Climate Change Summit. Excellencies, the biggest threat faced by humanity today is climate change. It is a threat whose effects are felt by all. But its causes have their roots in the action of a few. Take Africa for instance. We collectively emit less than 5% of carbon, but we are the most vulnerable region. My country, South Sudan, with tiny emissions, for example, is currently experiencing floods, droughts, heat waves, and irregular rain patterns. We have over 2 million people who have lost their livelihoods as a result of climate change, and are in dire need of support. In the face of this reality, we cannot continue to lament about the impact of climate change, nor continue to wait for the financial support that has been promised but not delivered. We must seize this opportunity given to us by this African Climate Summit to come up with additional ways to address the impact of climate change. Why am I calling for additional measures? The reason is very clear. The $100 billion that was pledged at the United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP15, in 2009 has not been delivered. More importantly, that amount is not enough because Africa alone requires over $3 trillion to enable, mitigate, and adapt to the climate change. As Africans, we need to understand that transitioning to low carbon economy will come from within, and its path lies in operationalizing the theme of this summit, driving green growth and climate finance solutions for Africa, and well. This is the way to go. Driving green growth will allow us to come up with solutions that will address the financial gap between what was pledged in Copenhagen summit in 2009 and the actual figure needed by African countries to combat climate change. Excellencies, in South Sudan, we are endowed with the natural resources, and the challenges we face as a country are about finding ways to exploit these resources in a sustainable manner. The key question we have always is how do we responsibly exploit these resources in ways that contribute towards mitigation and adaptation to the impact of climate change. Part of our answer to these challenges lie in aligning our climate change policy with climate action plan that cuts emissions and adapt to climate impact. Presently, South Sudan has developed its second nationally determined contributions with the goal of generating 3,000 megawatts of renewable energy from hydro, solar, with the solar with wind, and geothermal gas. This to us is the path to net zero carbon by 2050. On top of this planned path, we aim to embark on climate-smart agriculture to meet our food needs. Apart from changing how we plan our development to mitigate the impact of climate change, we also have a vast potential in carbon trading that can generate further revenue to finance our climate adaptation. Our natural forests and the Sud wetlands have the largest capacity to absorb carbon in the world. In fact, I'm proud to say that the Sud wetland in my country is the third long of the world. These ecosystems can sequester millions of tons of carbon dioxide annually, and in them lies the potential for carbon trading I just mentioned. Excellencies, what I have enumerated are steps we can take individually as countries to reverse the impact of climate change. However, we in the global south expect developed countries to play their part, first by cutting their emissions by over 45%, and second, by living their commitment that was made in 2009 in Copenhagen to finance climate adaptation in developing countries. We cannot meet the target of maintaining the temperature rise to 1.5 Celsius by 2030 if the developed countries fail to meet their commitments, both in providing resources to assist with climate adaptation and leading the way in cutting their own emissions. Once again, I congratulate Kenya for successfully organizing the first Africa Climate Summit. I hope that all of us will speak with one voice at COP28 in Dubai. The time for climate action is now. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Let's give a round of applause to President Salva Kiir. Let me now take this opportunity to request President Macky Sall, the President of Senegal, to make his statement. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, President William Ruto, dear brother, chers collègues, chef d'État.
Dear colleagues, Head of State and Government, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Mr. Current Chairman of the African Union, Heads of Delegation, Honorable Ministers, distinguished participants. I thank you, President Ruto, for your kind invitation and the brotherly welcome accorded to us and for the invitation to this first Africa Climate Summit. I want to congratulate you on your leadership and as has been demonstrated in your very powerful statement this morning. The time is ripe for taking stock of the implementation of the commitments on climate and also to agree on an African common position. Everybody knows the risks and dangers related to global warming that continue to affect our countries, and worse still, they have even worsened. The last report of IPCC confirmed that the African countries will be the most impacted by climate change, while they contribute less than 4% of global warming. Africa, we must say, reacts in line with its measures, in line with its means, through innovative and research for solutions or decarbonization and also the climate change. At the global level, 11 Saharan countries execute the project of the Great Green Wall for a decade now. On that score, Senegal implements a reforestation program of 500,000 hectares of indigenous forests, and in order to stop the encroachment of the desert and restore, rehabilitate soil, the biodiversity, and support the silvopastoral activities. We pursue our efforts to, in fact, execute the carbon-resilient projects, and particularly as regards energy transition. And thanks to the implementation of our mixed energy programs, renewable energy represents today 31% of our electricity installed capacity, and part of it is from solar energy, and the other components come from wind and hydroelectric power. We at present implement an important program of rural electrification of more than 1,000 villages financed at the cost of 75 million euros, together with the Green Climate Fund and also with the West African Bank. These efforts will be strengthened thanks to the strategy. That is, we need to agree, and we cannot prevent Africa from using its domestic energy sources. We, in this transitional phase, ensure that the solutions, African solutions, be over in carbon and also be resilient. And obviously for those who pollute more or less than 3%, that energy transition be abandoned. It will be, in fact, another injustice to Africa. For us, gas is an energy transition, and our policy in energy transition towards net zero is on the transport system with the regional express train, which is operational for 2 years now, which carry more than 130,000 people every day, which obviously is electric, and also the rapid electric bus, and which obviously will be used before the end of the year. In the same spirit, Senegal signed last June with the partners of G7 its program for an energy transition, which is based on JEPI, with an investment that requires the mobilization of 2.7 million euros. And we have the ambition of raising it to 40% of renewable energy in our energy mix by 2030. Having said that, we have to agree that essentially the African countries should realize and implement their green program, and Mr. President, you have reminded us about it, while the financing of adaptation should be supported by at least by concessional credits in conformity with the what was agreed in Paris. In the perspective of COP28, we should pursue our advocacy for the mobilization of resources dedicated to green financing. That is the key to resolve the problem of climate change and global warming through responsible and interdependent efforts of countries from developing countries. To conclude, I want to express my support to the Alliance for Green Infrastructure initiated by the African Development Bank, the African Union and Africa 50 in order to support the execution of the projects that are carbon sober and that are resilient. And I want to invite all the partners to contribute to this initiative. And finally, I thank the Central Adaptation Center in its work of promotion of the program to accelerate adaptation in Africa. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. A round of applause for President Macky Sall, please. Now it's the opportunity for President Jacinto Filipe Nyusi, the President of Mozambique, to make his statement. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Asante ndugu Rais Ruto, naongera.
Thank you very much, Ruto,
mkutano mzuri
for this opportunity.
kurudisha heshima kwa Afrika.
Your Excellency William Ruto, President of Kenya, Your Excellency Azar Usman, President of Comoros and the Chair at the AU,
ilustres chefes de Estado,
distinguished heads of state and government,
Sua Excelência
Your Excellency Moussa Faki
da Comissão da União Africana,
from the AU Commission,
Excelências, minhas
Your
senhoras,
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen.
eu começo por agradecer
First of
o
all,
convite do
I would like to commend the invitation of Your Excellency President Ruto and the warm welcome
participarmos nesta cimeira
and the invitation to participate in the Africa Climate Summit hosted by the Kenyan government together with the AU Commission.
Excelências, a decisão
Your Excellencies,
da Assembleia
the
da
decision
República
by the
deste ano
African Union
para a realização
General
desta
Assembly
cimeira surgiu
to host
da necessidade de construir
this
uma solução
event
africana
is in order to have a shared African vision regarding the climate crisis that is affecting the world and mostly Mozambique, Africa. And looking specifically at Mozambique,
o país sofre
the country
ciclicamente
is
o impacto
cyclically
das mudanças
ravaged by the impacts of climate change. It's not what I've heard about, this is what we live, and as of February every year, and even until May, we suffer from the adverse effects of climate change.
Desde 2019,
Since 2019, we have suffered from the cyclones Idai, Dineo, Freddy, amongst others. We had many natural storms and drought. Cyclone Freddy was extraordinary because it took longer time, more than 14 days, and we were affected twice by Cyclone Freddy because first affected us on the coast and then went back, and then it affected again Mozambique on its pathway to Malawi. We know that such disasters affect negatively populations in Mozambique, not only, but in other countries. Your Excellency, Your President, the interventions that we've heard
foram exaustivas.
were exhaustive.
Tentaram explicar o que é
Such
mudanças climáticas, por que
statements try to explain what is climate change and what are the impacts of climate change. So I'll not be repetitive, and I would like to
mais objetivo
be more objective and straightforward
partilhando a experiência
by sharing the experience of Mozambique with regard to
e mitigação das
climate change, prevention, mitigation, and adaptation, and to emphasize the following. First,
as áreas de conservação.
the conservation areas.
25% do território nacional
25% of the Mozambican territory is covered by parks, reserves, game parks, including marine protection areas. In this perspective, different actions were endeavored by the Mozambican government together with private partners and local communities in protecting these areas that have led to the reduction of poaching of rhinos, lions, as well as illegal logging. So why am I referring to the cooperation of communities? Because very often we just talk at a high level, but those that are living those realities with the nature is communities. So they have to be collaborating with us in order to protect what are their livelihoods. I've also spoken about elephants. You know that the best gardener in the forest is the animal, specifically elephant, meaning that if we do not protect, for example, our animals, our gardens and our forests can be threatened seriously. Secondly, Mozambique hosts the most extensive Miombe forest, which is the largest ecosystemic system in the world, and it extends for more than 2,564 kilometers throughout the Zambezi Basin. As a way of protecting the Zambezi Basin that covers 8 countries from Southern Africa, last year we have held the regional conference under the leitmotif towards an integrated and sustainable management of Miombo, towards resilience to climate change and protection of the the Great Zambezi. Thirdly, in Mozambique, the disaster risk management is governed by law, whereby it sets forth an integrated disaster risk management reduction, sustainable recovery of human resiliency, as well as infrastructural resiliency, ecosystemic resiliency, and climate change adaptation. I would like to emphasize that, for example, for each construction work that occurs in Mozambique, they have to comply with the law in order to be considered as resilient construction works. Fourth, we have created disaster risk insurance in order to cater for situations of natural disasters and support of vulnerable groups. One of the efforts towards disaster risk management and reduction is by engaging local communities, as also referred, but we are also prioritizing conservation agriculture. This is relevant in our strategy towards food security, and we promote the preservation of soils, soil quality, the preservation of water resources, the prevention of wildfires that led to deforestation and adverse effects from climate change. Moreover, the management of biomass energy, considering that our rural communities greatly rely on firewood. So we have been expanding rural electrification based on our national grid from the Cabora Bassa Dam and solar grids within the initiative Energy for All. Besides expanding the Cabora Bassa Dam that serves up some of the countries in Southern Africa, we are also prioritizing some hydroelectric projects such as Pandankua, as well as the Ntemani gas plant. And Ntemani will have around 400 megawatts, with the major one. We have the territorial planning project. Through the territorial development and spatial planning. And this occurs because very often we see that people just build irregularly, and if we do not plan how we are going to build our urban spaces, we can lead or contribute towards erosion. Another aspect has to do with institutional and legal reforms based on the protection of biodiversity, including the reactivation of the main fines, and meaning that we have severed fines and penalties against poaching, related to poaching, as well as illegal logging. As a result of these institutional and legal reforms, Mozambique has been considered in carbon credits, and Mozambique is the first African country to receive payments from the World Bank related to carbon trade. By strengthening the early warning system, we have implemented the program One District, One Weather Center. I'm just emphasizing what we're doing as a country because we cyclically suffer from adverse weather effects. So we have decided to strengthen our early warning systems so that communities are ready when those disasters strike us. This year we have also inaugurated the Beira meteorology radar in the central part of our country in order to detect cyclones in a radius of 400 kilometers, and we are planning on setting up 2 additional radars in the northern and southern part of the country. Hence, we will be covering the whole country. We also adopted the Maputo Declaration regarding the integrated early warning system that fits into the national operational and strategic goals. We would also like to share that Mozambique also hosts the the SADC Humanitarian Operation Center, which is a center aiming at protection and prevention. Mozambique has an extensive coastline of around 2,700 kilometers, meaning that we should give special attention to the ocean as the regulator of temperature and climate in the planet. We have ratified the Marpol Convention of 1978 regarding sea pollution that also complements the national legislation regarding illegal fishing and the protection of marine diversity, meaning that if we do not protect our biodiversity, we are going to contribute towards negative impact of the environment, especially the oceans. Your Excellency, before I conclude, Your Excellency Ruto, I would like to show my appreciation for this initiative, and we also would like to exhort all the leaders here to subscribe as a single voice the Nairobi Declaration regarding climate change, and shall we have a collective action towards it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. A round of applause again for President Nyusi. Let me now take this opportunity to give the floor to President Nana Akufo-Addo, the President of Ghana. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
President Ruto, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I join other speakers in applauding the Kenyan President, our host, President William Ruto, for his initiative in convening this summit, and thank him for his hospitality. A summit to define a common African position towards the deliberations of COP28 in Dubai is a highly commendable one, especially if it can help us define how we can mobilize our own resources to address this critical issue of climate change. Ghana's nationally determined contributions towards combating climate change have been fully incorporated into government's coordinated program for economic and social development policies to facilitate their implementation. We have introduced major policy interventions that have development and climate projection imperatives. Our flagship programs, whether they are the programs for planting for food and jobs, or One Village, One Dam, or One District, One Factory, are all geared towards boosting industrialization and rural development, as well as building our resilience to the impacts of climate change. The strategic focus of the One Village, One Dam initiative, for example, in the northern regions of our country, is to provide all year-round access to water to smallholder farmers who practically have no viable livelihood alternatives during the long dry seasons. We're also determined to make natural gas, which we have in abundance, available for the generation of electricity. We placed a ban on illegal mining, the phenomenon we call galamsey, which was destroying our water bodies, vegetation, and our forests. Some 20,000 young people have been engaged to plant more than 30 million trees in 2 years to create jobs and restore degraded land. These policy initiatives are already using positive results to the attainment of the SDG goals, particularly the goal of reducing our carbon emissions. Additionally, I have established an advisory group of prominent private sector chief executives who are setting up a $100 million SDGs delivery fund and a $200 million green fund to complement government's efforts at tackling climate change and funding the implementation of the SDGs. Whilst we strive to do our bit to halt climate change at the national level, we expect also a lot to be done at the international level. One major issue of concern to us is the need to streamline access to international climate finance to complement national funding. I believe this forum will throw more light on practical ways to mobilize financial resources to support the implementation of national climate actions, especially how we can guarantee a different future from the past and ensure that the commitments of the developed world towards climate finance, which have not been met in the past, will be met in the future. Excellencies, it is obvious that we have to act swiftly and decisively to mitigate these effects and ensure a sustainable future for generations to come. The impact of climate change, as we know, is not limited to the African continent alone. It is a global issue that affects all of us. Thus, addressing climate change in Africa, as President Ruto so forcefully articulated, is a moral and strategic necessity for global climate action. Hopefully, COP28 in Dubai will provide us a concrete roadmap towards that end and ensure a just energy transition for us in Africa. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. A round of applause again for President Nana. Let me now take this opportunity to ask my sister, the President of Tanzania, President Suluhu Hassan, to make her statement. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Your Excellency, President William Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya and Chair of the African Committee of Heads of State and Government on Climate Change, Excellencies, Heads of State and Governments, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, thank you very much for being a gracious host of this August Assembly that sets the tone of Africa's growth now and the future. I thank the government and the people of Kenya for the excellent preparation of the summit and the warm reception accorded to me and my delegation. The convening of this important summit is both timely and opportune, as the theme, driving green growth and climate finance solution for Africa and the world, is quite befitting, especially now ahead of COP28, where parties will take stock of our efforts to address the climate crisis and commitment to address both climate crisis in the context of the Paris Agreement and the Climate Convention itself. Excellencies, the stakes are high and actions have to take place not tomorrow, but today and literally now. As Africans, we have no choice but to seize the moment to capitalize on its potential to offer solutions to green growth and decarbonization, and while creating resilience to its our communities and economies. We can no longer afford to address economic development, climate change, and African poverty burden in isolation. The interplay between development and climate change is undeniable, and this interlink demand integrated and coherent solution that will provide opportunity for socio-economic development of Africa. Excellencies, while the continent is highly impacted by the changing climate, it is nevertheless holding the key to solving the climate challenge. The just released Economic Development in Africa Report 2023 shows the potential of Africa to capture technology-intensive global supply chains, and it said it's all about development of Africa with climate change. It provides a unique insight into Africa's centrality to the green transition that will clearly transform our continent economies. It is said that all metals and minerals that are important and strategic for the low carbon transition are abundantly found in Africa. And these are chromium, lithium, natural graphite, nickel, niobium, rare earth metals, silver, and many more. Given the abundance of these minerals, the continent needs to reposition itself not only as a supplier of raw materials globally, but strengthen the value chains by ensuring their conversion into intermediate and final products is done within the continent. As critical minerals, as they were called critical minerals, they have to make critical contributions to our internal revenue collection and employment creation. They also have to contribute critically in the environmental protection in our countries. So having all these, Africa has to stand firm to use the materials for our own development. Excellencies, human capital dividend in Africa is another force to reckon. To avoid the past mistakes in the history of our continent, we need to focus on human capital advancement by training our own people, especially youth, so as to be able to reap from these vast opportunities. We need to consider the climate crisis as an opportunity to address the youth unemployment challenges. Excellencies, beyond the African potentials, we have potentials in our individual countries. My country, Tanzania, is leading the way by demonstrating strong momentum in driving the green growth. Almost 95% of our energy is from hydro and natural gas. We are also leading in nature conservation with almost 38% of our landmass under conservation in various regimes. We are also committed in nurturing the ecosystems that hold the promise of creating thousands of new jobs and unlimited national economic and global benefits. Talking on the offering of critical mineral to the world, Tanzania has huge deposits of some of these critical minerals needed today. Helium is present around Lake Rukwa Basin, nickel deposits around Lake Victoria, graphite reserves at the southern eastern part of the country, and we also accommodate other deposits, critical minerals, including copper and lithium, as well as rare elements. Despite of the above scenario, we, however, need to face the fact that Tanzania, and indeed the whole of the African continent, still faces unprecedented impacts of climate change, with limited capacity to finance the mitigation and adaptation needs. And thus, as we head towards COP28, we have to raise an African voice on the establishment and capitalization of a special fund for Africa. The contribution and the pledges which are given by the advanced countries have to say what percentage of those pledges goes to Africa, and not just a blanket pledges. As I conclude, and as you are all aware, Tanzania is hosting the AGRIF Food and Agriculture Summit this same week. The Presidential Summit is on 7th of September, day after tomorrow. I therefore wish to use this opportunity to once again invite you to Tanzania, and I'll personally be there to welcome you all. Once again, I congratulate you, Mr. President Ruto, for organizing such a successful event, and I look forward to seeing you all in Dar es Salaam. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Another round of applause for President Samia Suluhu Hassan. Now it's my pleasure to request my brother, President Mohamed Yunus Memphi, the President of Libya, to make his remarks. Your Excellency, Mr. President.
Your Excellency, President of Kenya, President William Ruto, and head of the Committee of African Heads of States concerned with climate change. Heads of states, heads of governments, members of the African Union, Mr. Fuka Musa Fiki, head of the African Commission. May I extend my wholeheartedly thanks to President Ruto and the Kenyan people for hosting this very important summit. It is important for Africa and it's important for the whole world. I'd like to congratulate President Ruto for his wise leadership for the African Committee on Climate Change. I value the efforts exerted by the Commission to have a uniformed African stance with regards all sorts of related matters and all sorts of mutual concerns. Since the inception of the African Union, Africa has always been saying that it should get rid of the historic injustice it's suffering from until now. But we're facing so many risks and challenges imposed by climate change, and it's affecting the whole world. The African Union called on us to work hands in hands, rich and poor, north and south, and to mobilize all our efforts and resources to mitigate those risks and to also adapt to those changes and to change and transform those risks and challenges to opportunities based on strategic partnership to bridge the financing and technical gap, to empower Africa and the South in general to move forward from the weakest link to the higher level of being a partner. And this would give more opportunities for adaptation to the whole world. And that would help us to achieve a sustainable horizontal development. We should undertake quick and urgent measures to eliminate any kind of damages or risks that could be irreparable in the future or could threaten life on this planet Earth. We need more solutions. Africa has always been a promising continent. As you can see in this summit, Africa can provide to this planet a lot if our partners are committed to their pledges. This is a good opportunity to deal with the risks in an efficient way, starting with carbon emissions to green growth, green minerals. All those opportunities to provide sustainability and opportunities for energy sources that can be very well used in environment-friendly uses, by bridging the technical and bridging the financing gap and the technical gap, and to have different renewables like, for instance, solar energy, wind, and all sorts of other sources. And also, we need to talk about fossil energy. We need to have some kind of harmonized climate initiatives to face climate change and to stand against the individual interests of some of the industrialized countries. The African continent requests are clear in the documents of this meeting and also in the decision of the African meeting that decided on holding this summit before COP28 in Abu Dhabi. And in the draft declaration of our summit, all these texts helps us to have concerted efforts and to stick to our stance and to call on bridging any kind of barriers between us and other industrialized countries, and to draw together the upcoming stage on basis of partnership, seeking one unified goal and according to partnership. Would like to greet our development partners attending today, the international organizations, the private sector, the scientific research centers, the academia, the civil society, women, youth, and also the participants in the Environment Expo. And after the conclusion of this meeting, which is going to be crowned with our declaration representing the unified African stance, we're going to be able to mobilize our efforts, and we're going to attend and participate in COP28 to defend the outcomes of our summit here in Nairobi. And thank you very much. Thank you, President Ruto.
Your Excellency. A round of applause for President Memphi again. Thank you. Let me now take this opportunity to ask my brother, Julius Bio, the President of Sierra Leone, to make his statement. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, President Dr. William Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, Your Excellency Azali Assoumani, President of the Union of Comoros and Chairperson of the African Union, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Your Excellency Musa Faki Mahamat, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Your Excellency Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General, Your Excellency Patricia Scotland, the Secretary General for Commonwealth, Your Excellency First Ladies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm pleased to address this high-level session of the African Climate Summit 2023 under the Kenyan presidency and to reaffirm Sierra Leone's commitment to scale up climate action urgently. I must thank His Excellency President William Ruto and the government of the Republic of Kenya for the excellent arrangements made for this summit as African countries seek to address climate change priorities in this critical decade. From coastal kisses with the Atlantic Ocean to the panoramic vista, from the towering cane of the mountains, the Loma Mountain, to our sprawling national parks, Sierra Leone is a canvas painted with nature's most vibrant hues. Our golden beaches are a testament to nature's artistry. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, if you've not been to Sierra Leone, I'm inviting you to come. However, beneath our nation's beauties lies an unmistakable urgency. With a median age of just over 19 years, our young population, like the other young populations representing Africa's vibrant future, stand at a defining crossroads. Their legacy, and indeed our collective legacy, is shaped by the choices we make today. The seas, once serenading us with gentle lullabies, now one of rising tides that could erase generational achievements. The rains which celebrated our lands now pose a looming threat. Why Sierra Leone is rich with nature's gift. This very geographical splendor renders us vulnerable. Climate change for us isn't a distant shadow. Climate projections in Sierra Leone include temperature increases, extreme weather conditions, intense precipitation, and rising sea levels. Our shores, symbols of natural grandeur, are receding. Many of our communities face displacement, and our pristine beaches risk fading away, and calamities like landslide and floods have become hauntingly regular. The surge in pests and diseases is another testament to our enduring imbalance. Without swift collective action, we risk witnessing the obliteration of Sierra Leone's invaluable ecosystems, leading to further dislocation of our communities and the devastation of their sources of sustenance. This is not just a Sierra Leone story. It is an African story. And I dare say it is a global story too. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, our world is in trouble. But our continent is even more so. The evidence is clear. The time for action is now. But we are running out of time. Grounded in this stark reality, my government remains unwavering in our commitment to fortifying climate resilience, ensuring our people thrive sustainably and harmoniously with nature. In our updated nationally determined commitment, Sierra Leone has defined a progressive pathway forward for cutting greenhouse gases emission from the 2005 levels by 5% by 2025, 10% by 2030, and 25% by 2050. My government is unyieldingly devoted to climate change resilience and adaptation. This includes support for community-based adaptation in agriculture and energy sectors, integrated water resource management, and climate change disaster risk management. We are also poised to improve meteorological services for early warning systems and enhance and protect conservation of natural habitats and ecosystems. Furthermore, our climate change mitigation strategies extend to promoting renewable energy, infrastructure, resilience, and extensive reforestation efforts on at least 960,000 hectares of land. As we engage in country planning, we will also prioritize low carbon screening. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, to reaffirm our commitment We have institutionalized efforts against global menace, this global menace. We have established a dedicated Ministry of Environment and Climate Change and a Climate Change, Renewable Energy and Food Security Presidential Initiative led by Dr. Kande Yonkela. We are designing policies and programs and laying the framework for establishing strong partnerships for funding and implementing projects on major cross-cutting thematic areas of national and global significance. Agriculture is the mainstay of our economy. Recognizing the core importance and extreme vulnerability of agriculture in Sierra Leone, we are focusing on resilience and innovation within this sector, leveraging technology and forward-thinking strategies for climate adaptation. Our overarching aspiration, as enshrined in our National Development Plan, is clear. Achieve food and nutrition security by 2030 through climate-smart practices bolstered by renewable energy throughout the agricultural value chain. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, meaningful inclusion and intergenerational dialogue are crucial to achieving SDG 13, to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. In Sierra Leone, we consider our women equal partners for development. We passed the Progressive Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Bill, which guaranteed by law a minimum of 30% representation of women for all appointive and elective positions. My government is committed to promoting the inclusion of women in climate resilience programs and the participation of women in decision-making for climate change adaptation and mitigation governance at all levels. We must harness our demographic dividends on the continent and involve our youthful population in our climate adaptation and mitigation efforts throughout by involving the youth in everything that we do. Sierra Leone's quest for environmental resilience hinges upon our capacity to address climate finance, build local competencies, and refine our legislative blueprints, and etc. Solutions like carbon markets, innovative debt swaps, and novel financial tools such as leveraging our natural resources may be our bridge to surmount the fiscal chasm. Our appeal is clear. Sierra Leone seeks equitable, nimble, and timely access to climate financing. We ask for unbarred access to new climate change adaptation and mitigation technologies and shared knowledge. Our salvation from escalating climate crises lies in collective wisdom and concerted efforts. Another challenge is our institutional prowess in designing programs that attract climate finance is still developing. We yearn for guidance and backing to boost our legislative architecture, especially concerning forest conservation. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, while shared, the responsibility for climate adaptation and mitigation is not and should not be evenly distributed. Expecting countries like Sierra Leone to bear the brunt of a crisis that scarcely contributed to without robust support from the primary emitters, the industrial giants, is fundamentally unjust. Our stance is unequivocal. We are here to collaborate, not to capitulate. We seek cooperation, not charity. The actions of significant polluters must pivot from mere declarations and vague commitments to actionable, technology-driven reparations. It is a demand grounded in the technical feasibility of climate justice, not just its moral imperative. A unified front against the existential crisis is not just desired, it is imperative. As I close, I implore all of us present, the hourglass of action is dwindling, and the sands of time wait for none. Let's come together, not just in spirit, but in action, but in actionable solidarity. For in unity we find just strength, but not just strength, but salvation. Thank you.
Another round of applause for President Bayo. Thank you very much. Now let me take this opportunity to request my sister again, Her Excellency Saleh Work Zewde, the President of Ethiopia. Madam President, you have the floor.
Your Excellency, President William Ruto, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. This is a very important summit. Congratulations to the African Union for organizing it and for Kenya for being our gracious host, as it is in the tradition of this country. Africa has tried its best to make its voice heard. This is not the first time that we meet to do so. In fact, to speak with one voice and to alert partners of the disastrous consequences. Ethiopia has been on the forefront of this fight. A lot has been done to coordinate our efforts in order to have a strong common position. Common position is indeed always needed in our African Union Forum. Today it's about climate, but the continent's major issues such as peace, stability, progress requires indeed our common position. It has been increasingly difficult to explain to our people, and particularly to our youth, this contradiction. Resource-rich continent and yet poor people. To explain the injustice that has been mentioned many times here today. That is why our summit cannot and should never be a talk show, but a place where concrete actions and actionable actions are being taken. Let me also say that without sufficient research publications, it would be difficult for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change to get accurate representation of Africa's special needs and circumstances that would build evidence-based for advancing the key ask of the continent. So it is imperative that as Africa, we prioritize investments in our research capacity to develop scientific publications to inform and guide global efforts to combat climate change. We must emphasize on investing in African research institutions to produce regionally relevant science that can inform the different working groups under the IPCC. This endeavor requires a strong commitment from both African scientists and the international community, accompanied by the financial capacity necessary to deliver this research. Ethiopia has witnessed in the past decades, including the last consecutive years, persistent drought, flooding, locust invasion, where millions were severely affected. We've been carrying out different practical policy and action interventions as a step to contribute to emission removal and building adaptation capacity. Besides, we've also put in place National Adaptation Plan to build and boost resilience and adaptation capacity. Building climate-resilient green economy is one of the pillars of our 10-year National Development Plan. As per our strategic consideration, we have launched the long-term low-emission and climate-resilient development strategy that has been submitted to the UNFCCC with the aspiration to achieve net zero emission and building climate-resilient development by 2050. The Ethiopian Green Legacy Initiative that has been mentioned again today, that was launched in 2019, has succeeded in planting 25 billion seedlings on the degraded landscapes by mobilizing volunteers throughout the nation. The initiative helped for the development of more than 120 nurseries and created more than 180,000 jobs throughout the country. More importantly, the initiative is intended to inculcate the green behavior in each of our citizens. The greening initiative has been scaled up into fruit-bearing perennial trees, thereby directly linking the initiative with our food system transformation strategy. In the agriculture sector, Ethiopia has achieved notable progress in enhancing its wheat production, effectively transforming a deficit of 15 million metric tons in 2019-2020 into a surplus of 65 million quintals in 2022-23. I think this achievement has enabled Ethiopia to meet not only its domestic need, and in fact commence with exports. This gives me a good opportunity to thank the African Development Bank, and most particularly its president, my young brother, for the support that was given to us. The plan is to cultivate 2 million hectares during the dry season alone in 2023. The success of wheat production is critical for the country's efforts to enhance food security and achieve food sovereignty. In terms of renewable energy production, Ethiopia is also investing on green energy projects such as hydroelectric, wind, solar, and geothermal energy sectors, as well as promoting modern rural cooking technologies. We have successfully run the hydro energy producing projects, including the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, with domestic resources, which will significantly make difference in the country's status in terms of social, environmental, and economic needs. Ethiopia is striving to finance climate actions proactively and persistently as means systematically addressing the economic challenges of the country. Accordingly, the government has invested over $82 million from 2011 to 2019, mobilized from domestic, bilateral, multilateral sources, as well as from international climate finance institutions on climate change mitigation and adaptation projects and programs in agriculture, energy, transport, industry, forest, urban development, and health sectors. Despite this investment, Ethiopia still needs to attract and mobilize a significant finance to support its climate-compatible development agenda. We still count on our partners to fulfill their commitments to developing countries and committing themselves for the new challenge of setting new quantified finance goals in the coming years. We also strongly urge multilateral financial institutions to undergo a serious reform that fits for purpose for the needs and circumstances of developing countries, rather than fueling the historical debt accumulated on the shoulders of developing countries and mainly Africa. Our future depends on our decision now. Urgent action is needed in limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius to avoid worst impact. 8 years after its signature, ensuring the implementation of Paris Agreement is not an option again. As I conclude, I would like to assure you Ethiopia's unwavering commitment to work with our fellow Africans and other global partners to achieve our priorities and the long-term objective of making the planet comfortable for present and future generations. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, my dear sister. Another round of applause for President Zewde. Let me now take this opportunity to request Brahim Ghali, the President of Sahrawi Arab Republic. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Your Excellency, President of Kenya, Dr. William Ruto, and also head of the Committee of Heads of States on Climate Change, and also head of the AU, and also Mr. Musa Fiki, head of the AC, Your Excellencies, heads of states, heads of governments, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure at the outset to extend my wholehearted thanks to the Republic of Kenya, the government of Kenya, and the people of Kenya, and President William Ruto for this gracious invitation to attend this meeting. Would like to thank you for the excellent hospitality, and would like to thank you for all sorts of efforts and generosity for the sake of the success of this great event, which is the Climate Summit in Africa. And our Saharan Republic also is facing the climate change like so many other countries in the world. We're facing all these challenges related to climate change. Meanwhile, we have another struggle to put an end to occupation in my countries due to the occupation because of the conflict with Morocco. And those challenges are intertwined. This situation led to the displacement of more than 200,000 of our citizens to some territories that are suffering from climate problems, and temperature in the refugees camps are immeasurable. In our occupied territories, the different practices of occupation, which is outside the control of the international law without any kind of control. It leads to the aggravation against climate change, like, for instance, the problems with fishery, and this depletes our water and agricultural resources for the sake of exports. And this kind of military occupation is sort of a wall and divides our country into two parts. And this deprives the occupied territories from water. And this is a very dangerous environmental deterioration, and this increases drought in our region. It also led to so many deeply rooted changes in the surface of the land, which became more exposed to wind erosion and also water stagnation. There are also mined areas along this wall became inhabitable, and also it has a very limited economic production. Those challenges, huge challenges, required practical measures on our side to deal with the situation. And in this context, we developed our NDC, and we identified through it the urgent measures for adaptation with climate change and mitigation of its limits. And we did that through strengthening development, which is based on renewables instead of fossil energy. And we supported NDC by having an NAP or NAP through the common ministerial initiatives that included several ministries. In the Sahrawi refugees camps, we developed agricultural systems to reduce the use of water. We also developed modern means with lower costs for housing. And the purpose of that is to face the increasing risks of floods, in addition to the spread out of using solar energy in small units. We also have experienced some electricity projects using solar energy, wind energy, and we're using it also in medical facilities in remote and isolated areas. There we use solar energy. Mr. President, although we have a desert nature, but we do have so many resources to provide to the blue economy in Africa. We have long coasts, and it's very good for fisheries. And our coast, which goes as far as 1,110 kilometers, the land there is known for its resources, and of course it's adopted by Ramsar Convention. Those areas are Wadi Saqiya, Bujdur, Dakhla Bay, and Sabkha Imlili. And although all those resources are exposed to climate change, because of the excessive depletion of those resources under occupation, but our country emphasizes that it's committed to execute and implement cautious plans in this area and this is in harmony with the African initiatives and its goals to protect the African coasts in Africa. In addition to our work or setting out administrative plans for the important environmental areas, and according to the climate change requirements, we're going to work with other countries and have partnerships and with those countries and African organizations to build our national capacities and to exchange experience in relation to the blue economy. The delay of the termination of the occupation by the United Nations, which is the last in Africa, that doesn't mean that we are fully participation in the international global efforts to face the climate change and its detrimental impacts. It is illogical that we're deprived of getting the required and allocated financing to face climate change, and we're also deprived of the technical assistance through the climate change mechanism under the United Nations and other organizations. We cannot be deprived from our rights and duty to take part with Africa and the world in this kind of efforts against climate change. And also, we have been coexisting for years and years with those dire and difficult climate circumstances like other countries. We should be represented in the new FCCC and also in the COP. And also we should sign also the Paris agreement and take part in the negotiations, and to also adopt our NDC regularly to the UNFCCC. Our voice is and will be an African voice, and it's going to support the African voice and stance. Sustainable development and the management of blue economy in Africa is strongly related to the way we use to respond to climate change, and we are ready to contribute with our brothers and sisters in Africa and the whole world to achieve the best results and outcomes. I wish you all the best in this summit, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency Gali, for that statement. Now it's my humble duty to request His Excellency Evariste Ndayishimiye, President of Burundi, to make his statement. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mheshimiwa Ruto, na hongera sana kwa maandalizi mazuri ya mkutano huyo.
I want to thank God for having given us this very beautiful continent and many opportunities for development. Excellency William Samuel Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, our host, Excellencies, heads of state and government present, representatives of international and regional organizations, all protocols observed. At the outset, may I thank President Samuel Ruto, the government and people of Kenya for the warm welcome accorded to us. I also congratulate the government of Kenya and the African Union on the excellent organization of this summit, which is being held at the appropriate time. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, climate change is one of the greatest collective threats to mankind. In Burundi, the impact of climate change, mainly through drought and torrential rains, violent winds, floods, and landslides are the major factors of displacement of people. To this, we have to add the rising of the Lake Tanganyika and the growing land degradation, which push families to fight about the remaining fertile land. According to the findings, the annual loss in Burundi is estimated at $100 million. In these losses, 72% because of flood, 5% because of torrential rain, and 40% of violent winds. Thus, these weather vagaries, in fact, lead to $70 million of loss, and it impacts on the well-being of the peoples, their livelihoods, provoke the destruction of human habitat as well as infrastructures, the proliferation of and the spread of diseases and loss in human life. Over the past 20 years, the 1001 hills of Burundi are exposed to the impact of climate change. Burundi was used to having rainfall of 9 months, but today drought has even grown beyond 4 months, with an unusual season and rhythm of seasons that affect agricultural productivity as well as animal husbandry. Burundi has increased the number of initiatives in order to face this phenomenon. Burundi is in line with all the conventions that relate to climate change. In this regard, Burundi has adopted an environment code in 2021, and one of the policies for environmental orientations taking into account climate change. This program is accompanied by the mobilization of farmers and by putting, that is, the planting of trees in fertile arable lands in order to retain the rain water. Burundi prepared in 2021 its nationally determined contribution, operational plans for adaptation plans also adopted, and according to Article 4, paragraph 9 of Article 4 of the Paris Declaration. At a practical level, Burundi is mobilizing regularly youth on vacation in preparing the nurseries for agroforestry and forestry seedlings, and to plant them during the period of reforestation, and also to have a program that is Burundi since 2018 wants to rehabilitate the degraded forest lands. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Burundi has the ambition by 2040 wants to develop its objectives of development and the protection of environment and the enhancement of resilience to climate change. According to these perspectives, there are many projects that are envisaged in order to consider a climate resilient program. the establishment of agropoles, hydroelectric centers, using photovoltaic cells, and the removal and the processing of waste, and through technological innovation that are adapted to the agricultural and situations where you will have fuel, wood, and other natural gas and biogas which were going to be used. As you know, Africa is bearing the burden of the impact of climate change, although it contributes less than 4% of global warming and emissions. Therefore, there is an urgent appeal to the developed countries to honor their commitments in Paris, made in Paris, and to work in favor of the developing countries in order to mitigate the climate change and also ensure the transition towards a green climate. To conclude, we reiterate our commitment to the Paris Declaration and also the Plan of Action of 2022 to 2032 of Africa as regards climate change and also resilient development. And I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for your comments. Another round of applause for President Evariste Ndayishimiye. Let me now take this opportunity to request the Vice President of Angola, my dear sister, to come and make her statement. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excelência William Samoei Ruto,
Your Excellency, the President of the Republic of Kenya, Mr. William Samoei Ruto, Your Excellency, Mr. Azali Assoumani, Chair of the African Union, Your Excellency, Mr. Moussa Faki, the Chair of the African Union Commission, Your Excellencies, First Ladies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. Allow me, Your Excellencies, to present to you, first of all, the regard of His Excellency, Mr. João Lourenço, the President of the Republic of Angola, whom I have the honor of representing in this August summit, attended by member states with the aim of contributing to finding durable solutions to address global challenges related to the climate change on our continent. We would like to take advantage of this opportunity to applaud the government of Kenya for the warm welcome I received, as well as the warm welcome to the Angolan delegation. We would like to applaud